In this video, we are going to talk about different strategies that will help you increase your credit limit with Capital One and other lenders. And we are going to talk about some of the dangers of having a Capital One credit card. But first, we are going to talk about some of the factors that lenders use to determine your credit limit in the first place. The two biggest factors are your previous credit history and your income. I know a lot of people in the past have made mistakes where they've missed a payment, had a late payment, carried a balance for a long period of time, or opened a bunch of accounts in a short period of time. And while we are all human and nobody is perfect, don't forget that the whole point of your credit score is to determine and show your credit worthiness. And if you have a history of missed payments, it could be really difficult for you to get a credit limit increase. It's like that one friend or family member who's notorious for owing people money or never paying people back, and they say, "Hey, can I borrow $20?" You're probably going to be reluctant to let them borrow money because they have a history of not paying people back. If you've had a rocky relationship with Capital One for the past 5 years, they're not going to exactly be excited to give you more credit. The second factor is your income. These companies aren't ever going to give you more credit than they think you can ever afford to pay back, because at the end of the day, these are businesses and their main goal above all else is to make money. And so if they ever feel like you cannot pay your balance back, then that in the long run is going to cause them to lose money. Even though, yes, they do make money from interest, if it takes you 50 years to pay that money back, at the end of the day, it's still not the most ideal situation for them. And if you get to a point where you can never pay that money back, some people literally have debt their whole entire life. So that's a situation that they want to try to avoid if possible. And honestly, if you do have low income, having a lower credit score is going to kind of be your best friend and help you stay out of trouble, because even if you do have a small spending problem, you would much rather be in $1,000 of debt than $8,000 worth of debt. Having a lower credit limit isn't necessarily always a bad thing. A lot of people start with the Capital One Quicksilver card as their very first credit card and are usually assigned limits around the 1,000 to 1,500 mark. My very first credit card was the Discover It cashback card, which I got at 18, and I was assigned a limit of $500. And at that age, I was taught, like most people, that credit cards are dangerous, they are the enemy, stay away from them, have them but don't use them. And so I had my card at 18 and I never used it until I was about 19 and a half, 20. And I learned that credit cards can actually be your friend. That's when I got into business credit and rewards and miles and all that, and it was so much fun. So I said, I'm going to start using my Discover It cashback card for literally every single thing. And then before you know it, I started to get credit limit increases without ever applying for a credit limit increase. So Discover every 3 months started giving me credit limit increases of like $500, $700, all because I suddenly started using my card multiple times a week for all my purchases. So the very first tip is to actually use your card. And the trick to this is that you do have to pay your balances in full every month. I've heard that a lot of people are taught that sometimes you can use your credit card as an extension of your debit card. And so this is a mindset that you grew up with and struggle with. I would recommend trying to pay your balances off once a week instead of, once a month. And then also checking your checking account regularly so you know exactly how much money you have to spend. Maybe check your checking account before you even make the purchase with your credit card. Something that really helped me was creating a conscious spending plan and creating a very strict limit to how much I can spend every single week. And the limit I gave myself was so strict and so low that even if I do overspend just a little bit, I'll still be fine. Try everything, do whatever you need to do to be able to use credit cards responsibly, because there are so many benefits and rewards to using credit cards, and not just for travel or cashback, just like the protection you get from using your credit card. So I highly recommend mastering financial discipline. Once the lender sees that you are now using the credit that they gave you, they will give you more credit. If you're not using the credit that they have given you in the first place, then they have no reason to give you more of what you're already not using, and they're probably going to close your account if you're not using the card. I just made a video about this, and I actually want to take this time to talk about credit card trifectas for a moment, because you can start using your card frequently but still not enough for a lender to want to increase your credit limit. I don't know, and I haven't figured out the exact number of how much you should be spending for where a credit card trifecta makes sense or is appropriate, but I want to say you should at least be spending $3,000 to $4,000 a month consistently for a trifecta to make sense, especially if your goal is an automatic credit limit increase every 3 months. There are a lot of reasons I would suggest someone who only spends around $2K a month to use one card, but in this specific example, let's say you spend $1,000 a month, $500 on an Amex Gold card and then $500 on the Capital One Quicksilver card. Let's say your Amex Gold card has a pay over time limit of $35,000 and your Capital One Quicksilver card has a limit of $7,000. That means you would only be using 1.4% of your Amex Gold card limit every single month and 7% of your Capital One Quicksilver limit every single month. Why would either of those companies give you a credit limit increase if you are barely using the card in their eyes? Because 1.4% of the limit is not a lot. And of course, you can do whatever you want, but just think about that. Another way to either get an automatic credit limit increase or to be approved for a credit limit increase if you apply for one is to pay your balances down. It's going to be very difficult for them to want to approve your credit limit increase request if you have not paid off the balance that you currently are carrying, because in their mind, you're going to continue to add to that balance and not really pay it off. Only making the monthly payments can make it look like you're either struggling to pay the balance off or you just don't have the funds to pay the balance off. If you are struggling to pay your balances off, I would suggest not making any new purchases on the card, and that includes any subscriptions that you may have, such as Netflix, Hulu, Spotify, things like that. I would personally recommend going back to using your debit card until you can fully pay off your credit card balance. It's really hard to pay off a balance when there's constantly new purchases being added to that balance. And while you are using your debit card for the time being, I would try to give yourself a weekly spending limit and trying not to use all the available money that you have. I think that would be a great practice for when you are able to start using your credit cards again. Another way to get a credit limit increase is by updating your income, especially if you first applied for this card when you were very young. I was approved for my Discover It cashback card when I was just 18 and I was only making $10 an hour working 15 hours a week. Thankfully, that has changed, but if lenders still think you make the same amount of money that you did when you first applied for the card, then they're not going to exactly be excited to give you more money because nothing has changed. In their eyes, since your income hasn't changed because you haven't updated it, you can't manage more credit. And if you are at least 21 years old, you can include income that you have reasonable access to as part of your income on your credit application or when you are applying for a credit limit increase. So let's say you are married and you have your own job, but your spouse pays all the bills and gives you extra spending money. And so even though the money your spouse gives you isn't part of your salary, you still have access to that money, and so it can be included on your credit card application. Any income that you can expect to have reasonable access to can be included as part of your income if you are 21 years old or older. If you have a Capital One card, you may have noticed that they have different tiers to all their credit cards. And I actually really like this about Capital One. The different tiers are broken up by credit level. So if you're at the Fair to Rebuilding level, you have options like the Quicksilver Secured card or the Platinum Mastercard. If you are at the Excellent to Good level, you have options like the Savor One Rewards for Good credit card and the Savor Rewards card. All of this information is easy to find and easy to navigate on the Capital One website. If the current Capital One card you have is a secured card or a card made for someone who has poor or fair credit, you might be better off applying for a whole new card if you want or need a higher credit limit. If you have the Quicksilver One Rewards card, you might not get a limit higher than $3,000, but if you apply for the Capital One Quicksilver Rewards card, you might get a limit of $7,000. If you're not sure if you'll get approved for a new card, I always recommend checking to see if you are pre-approved, which you can do right on the website. This way, there are no surprises and you don't have any unnecessary hard inquiries on your credit report. Now let's talk about the dangers of Capital One. Sometimes, and for some people, having access to higher credit limits means you have the potential to be in a higher amount of debt. Capital One is one of the worst lenders to be in debt with because their interest rates are so high. Most of Capital One's credit cards have an interest rate of over 30%, which means if you do happen to get into debt, it's going to be very hard for you to climb yourself out of that hole. Out of all the interest rates I've seen across different lenders, Capital One has the highest interest rates, so that's just something to keep in mind when you are applying for a new credit card with them or applying for a credit limit increase. And obviously, any amount of interest you have to pay back is going to be unfavorable, but having a card with an interest rate that high can keep you in debt years longer than if you had a card with an interest rate of 20%. For example, if you had a balance of $3,000, you'd be paying $77 per month with the Capital One Quicksilver One Rewards card. If you were carrying that same $3,000 on the Discover It cashback card with an interest rate of 22%, you would only be paying $55 a month. That could save you $264 a year, which could go towards your debt. And now you might be wondering how often you should apply for a credit limit increase and how much you should ask for. I believe every 3 months is perfect. You don't want to overdo it because I believe that makes you look suspicious to the lender, especially if you are constantly asking for a credit limit increase but your monthly spending is staying the same and your income has not changed. I have also seen people use different methods when it comes to how much you should ask for. I've seen people ask for 50% of their current credit limit every 3 months. So if you currently have a credit limit of $3,000, you will ask for a credit limit increase of $1,500. If this request is approved, you will have a new credit limit of $4,500, and it is safe to do this every 3 months as long as you are using your card and paying it off in full. And I've also heard people asking for 3 times their credit limit. It does work for some people, and if that's something you want to try, then go ahead and do that. My personal advice would be to align your request with your credit profile, your income, and your spending history. So if you currently have a credit limit of $2,000, but you don't have the best credit score, don't have the best credit history, your income hasn't changed, and you have low monthly spend, I wouldn't necessarily go ahead and ask for a $6,000 credit limit increase. That's just what I think. Go ahead and experiment and do whatever feels comfortable for you. That's it for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.